Welcome to Kitchen Sink Dharma, and today I want to talk a little bit about the process of thinking. And I want to talk about how much it's driven by patterns and habits that exist in all of us, and how not only is every one of our thoughts coloured by these patterns and habits, but also it's about how we create them and reinforce them, and how we're constantly feeding the habit energy that's within us. And this is something that the Buddha talked about. He actually talked about it. The Pali word that we're interested in today is sankharas, or if you prefer the Sanskrit version, it's samskaras. And I want to say I think we're let down by clunky translation. So when we read about sankharas, the sutras can often seem quite complicated and quite obscure, whereas I don't think it has to be that way. And I think the word sankhara is translated in all sorts of weird ways, sometimes as formations or karmic predispositions and things like that. I've come across karmically active volitions, but I'd like to go with patterns or habits of mind. I think in this context that works. It's patterns that exist as a result of our conditioning, of our life experiences. So the question that I'm interested in today is, why is it that we react to things in the way that we do? And I'm not suggesting that we ask this in a judgmental way. I mean, we ask it with affectionate curiosity. So why is it that certain people or certain situations can so easily activate my anger or my fear or my desire? And one answer to this is that we just exist in this whole field of habit, and it's just how we are, that we've spent a whole lifetime building it. And every time we react to our experience, we're reinforcing that habit. And our patterns of thought feel so familiar and so normal that we tend not to notice them. But they dictate how we experience the world and how we react to the world, how we think and how we act. Because we're constantly bringing the past into the present, which is fine. You can see all this as a necessary thing, an essential learning mechanism. It's a capacity that we've evolved with to keep us safe. But there's a lot more to say about this, particularly from a Buddhist perspective. Our patterns of thought are the source of most of our agitation, most of our stress and our dissatisfaction. And the good news is that's a problem we can actually do something about. So life can be hard. There is suffering for everybody, suffering that can't be avoided. And we get sick, for example, we grow old, we lose the people that we care about. But there's also an optional layer of suffering. So stress and misery over which we've got some control. And when it comes to internally generated misery, we've got a choice. So when we see and understand our mental programs, if we see our habits of mind, that gives us a choice. It allows us to interrupt the momentum of a process that keeps us locked in reactivity. Because our patterns can be extinguished. They can actually be blown out, even the troublesome ones and the painful ones. And modern psychology talks about this. It calls the process dishabituation. And sometimes this process is referred to in the Buddhist teachings as purification. So, for example, there's a book called the Visuddhimagga, which is a commentary on the teachings of the Buddha that was written about 1600 years ago. Visuddhimagga literally means path of purification. And if the word purification doesn't resonate for you, or if it feels a bit too religious or a bit too judgmental, just bear with me for a moment, because in a way, the word purification is perfect. It's exactly what we're doing in our meditation practice. We're purifying those mental patterns, those conditioned habits. So it's the polar opposite of what we usually do, which is to reinforce them and strengthen them. So every time we practice responding to our habits with some equanimity, with some ease, there's a process of purification going on. And all of this happens in the body as well as in the mind. So let's say something happens to us and we don't really like it. So we're talking to someone, or we're reading something, or we're driving, or maybe we're watching the TV. Something comes up, something happens that we don't like. We don't like what we see or what we hear. And it has an unpleasant feeling to it. And what happens, of course, is we react. And there are these habits of reaction in us, and they're often very old, and sometimes they go as far back as childhood. So we don't like it and we react. And that reaction generates an unpleasant sensation or multiple sensations in the body. And sometimes it's subtle, sometimes it's not so subtle. So the sensations don't feel good either. It might be something in the stomach, in the gut, or in the chest, or in the throat. This doesn't feel nice, and we react to the sensations as well. And then we might try and distract ourselves. We might try and push away the sensations. We might try and externalize those unpleasant feelings and blame them on any number of other things or other people. And we've generated dissatisfaction. And not only that, we've also reinforced the pattern. It's a tiny bit stronger than it was. And this keeps happening. At least without mindfulness, it keeps happening. It keeps happening over and over again all the time and reinforcing itself. And actually a lot of suffering arises out of universal experiences that we take personally. We react, and it's something along the lines of, why me? Why is this happening to me? Even though it happens to everybody. So even though the experience we're reacting to is something that happens to all of us and it's not personal, we take it personally. But there's an alternative. So what about the alternative? What about purification? What about complete eradication of these habits of desire and ill will and confusion? So this is about what happens when we're actually consciously aware, when we're actually mindfully aware of the unpleasant feeling as it first arises. And when we bring some compassion to that, some friendliness to our experience, including the physical sensations that accompany every emotion, the feelings in the body, when we understand the impermanent nature of that, then purification in this context means we just stop giving energy to our habit of reaction. We just stop generating extra suffering. Even if another challenging feeling comes along straight after. Again, if we can move out of the field of habit towards a more conscious response, we're actually calming our patterns of restlessness and worry and remorse and resentment and longing and so on. We're calming the mind. We're calming the agitated mind and the agitated body. If you read translations of the early Buddhist teachings, the early suttas, they refer to calming the formations. That's how it's often translated, or something like guarding the sense doors. And if that language seems a little bit obscure, just think of it as a reminder that all of this is just happening in both the mind and the body. And without mindfulness, we don't just struggle and react against the thought. We also react against the feeling in the body. We react to our senses. And at some level, we turn away from the embodied experience that we're having. We just reject it. And without mindfulness, we're just simply reinforcing and strengthening those habits of reaction. So purification happens when we self-regulate, when we allow in a bit of calm, and when we listen to the body, and when we allow feelings to arise just as they are, and just welcome them, welcome them with a smile. And if we keep doing that over and over again, the habits of reactivity and clinging are gradually eradicated. So in the Anguttara Nikaya, again part of the early Pali Canon, there's a description of purifying gold. And it starts with ore, with gold ore. And it goes on to eliminating coarse impurities and then moderate impurities and then the very fine impurities. And it's a metaphor, of course it's a metaphor for purifying the mind. So if we can remain aware and steady while we apply mindfulness of body sensations, one layer of conditioned habit will arise and disappear, and then another one, and then another one. Each layer is more subtle than the last one, and every pattern more subtle than the last one. And all of these patterns have their roots in craving and ill will and confusion, and each one is gradually eliminated and eradicated and purified. So you may have noticed that sometimes when you sit in meditation, feeling nice and steady as you practice equanimity, strange things will bubble up. So strange thoughts about the past that appear to come from nowhere. Or there might be uncomfortable physical sensations and emotions, feelings. And if this happens, it's really good news. If this happens when I'm sitting, I'm really thankful for it. So memories and feelings come up. And the task is just to keep practicing, keep going, to stay steady if that's at all possible. And whether the practice feels good or not doesn't really matter. All we're doing is practicing staying aware and staying steady. So things bubble up in meditation because they've been trapped for years sometimes, and we haven't learnt to live with them yet. And by allowing whatever comes up and just sitting with it, we're actually processing it, we're purifying it, often down to a very subtle level. So it's like refining gold, as it's described in the sutta. And feelings that would normally cause us to shut down or react or become lost in obsessive thinking come up, and we just release them. We release them. We purify them. And layer after layer is processed and released. And these old patterns feel like they're part of who we are. They're often the lens through which we see the world. And we cling to them like they're the building blocks of our sense of self. And as humans, we tend to live our lives as though all these ripples and energetic movements in the mind are true. We take them very seriously. And they appear to be much more solid and stable than they really are. Because the reality is they're not. They just come and go all the time. And sometimes the wisest thing to do is actually to do absolutely nothing. So this is from Hermann Hesse. He writes, "You know quite well deep within you that there is only a single magic, a single power, a single salvation, and that is called loving. Well then, love your suffering. Do not resist it. Do not flee from it. It is only your aversion to it that hurts, nothing else." So my question is, can you find a place of balance and loving awareness? And from that place, just simply witness everything that's going on in the mind and everything that's going on in the body, everything that's touching your senses. And all of those disturbances and dramas, including the painful ones, can you just listen to them? Can you just simply listen to those feelings and ripples in the body without reacting? Because whatever feelings we refuse to accept will just simply keep coming back. They'll just simply keep agitating us until we accept them. So we witness those feelings until they reveal their insubstantial nature, their transient nature. By doing that, we free ourselves. And this is the practice. This is what we're doing. This is the practice. So thank you for listening, as always. And I hope you can join me again soon on Kitchen Sink Dharma.